in a forgotten corner of the world, where cracked earth meets endless skies and the silence of opportunity echoes louder than the wind, something extraordinary happened. A village where children once chased survival instead of dreams, where classrooms were only imagined, and where futures were limited by circumstance, found its heartbeat again. Not through a government promise or a stroke of luck, but through something far more powerful: the birth of a school. It wasn't just the construction of 4 walls and a roof. It was the building of hope, brick by brick. When everything seemed still, when possibility had withered like crops in the dry season, one school emerged as a light in the darkness. It called the children in, opened their minds, and gave the entire village something it hadn't felt in years: belief. Belief that they mattered, that they could learn, that they could rise. This is not just a story about education, it's a story about awakening. Because when one school opens its doors, 1,000 dreams find theirs. In a remote, nearly forgotten stretch of land, there was a village that had been left behind by time. Nestled far from the nearest town, it was isolated not just by distance, but by a deep and persistent lack of opportunity. There were no paved roads, no healthcare facilities, and most critically, no school. Children spent their days helping with chores, tending livestock, or wandering fields, their potential untapped and their futures unclear. Education wasn't just scarce, it was unimaginable. The older generation had accepted this as normal. They had lived their entire lives this way, believing that survival was the only goal. Dreams of becoming doctors, teachers, or scientists were not denied. They simply never existed in the first place. The absence of a school meant the absence of hope. Knowledge, imagination, and ambition had no soil in which to grow. Every sunrise looked the same as the last, and for many, tomorrow promised nothing different from today. Yet even in this forgotten village, there were children with bright eyes and curious minds, eager to learn, even if they didn't know what learning truly meant. They had questions about the stars, about the world beyond their hills, about why they couldn't read the signs on the worn-out cartons they found. They craved answers, but had no place to find them. This longing for something more lay quietly beneath the surface, waiting for the spark that would finally awaken their hidden dreams. When the idea of building a school was first introduced, it felt like a distant dream, too good to be true for many in the village. Some were skeptical, others hesitant, and a few were quietly hopeful. But then something changed. A team arrived, not with grand speeches or flashy promises, but with blueprints, bricks, and a deep respect for the community's input. The dream of a school began to take shape, not as a gift handed down from above, but as a shared project built from the ground up. The villagers were not passive recipients of this transformation. They became its builders, literally and figuratively. Men mixed cement, women prepared meals for the workers, and even children helped by carrying water and tools. This wasn't just construction, it was a collective effort that united everyone under a common purpose. For the first time, people who had long felt powerless were actively creating something that would shape their future. The energy in the village shifted. Where there had once been quiet resignation, now there was chatter, laughter, and the sound of hammers echoing with hope. What made this process even more powerful was the emotional investment everyone had in it. The school wasn't just a building, it was a symbol of self-belief. Each brick laid was a declaration that their children deserved better. The school began to rise, not only from the physical ground but from the hearts of a village that finally saw itself as worthy of progress. And with each day of construction, something deeper was being built too, a foundation of pride, possibility, and ownership that would sustain the community long after the final nail was driven in. Once the school doors finally opened, it marked more than just the beginning of classes. It marked the beginning of a new era for the village. Children who had never seen the inside of a classroom now stepped onto freshly swept floors with books in hand and eyes full of wonder. Desks replaced dirt patches, chalkboards replaced silence, and learning replaced the long hours once spent fetching water or working in fields. The sound of laughter, reciting alphabets, and curious questions echoed through the walls of a building that had become the heartbeat of the village. Parents watched in amazement as their sons and daughters returned home talking about history, math, and dreams of becoming doctors, engineers, and teachers. Many of these parents had never been to school themselves, and seeing their children dressed in uniforms sparked emotions that words couldn't fully express. Education, once seen as a luxury reserved for faraway cities, was now alive and growing in their own backyard. The school was no longer just a structure. It was the vessel carrying the village's future. Beyond academic subjects, the children began learning critical life skills: how to think for themselves, how to ask questions, how to solve problems. They started to envision possibilities that had never existed before. The school wasn't simply feeding minds, it was feeding hope. It wasn't just about getting through the school day, it was about building character, confidence, and curiosity. And with each lesson, the students weren't just changing their own lives, they were slowly reshaping the destiny of the entire community. The impact of the school extended far beyond the children. It reached into the hearts of the entire community. Adults who had spent their lives in the shadow of illiteracy began to see the school as a place for themselves too. Evening classes were introduced for parents and elders, where they learned to read, write, and do basic arithmetic. For many, it was the first time they could sign their name, read a medicine label, or help their children with homework. This not only improved their confidence, but also strengthened family bonds and deepened respect between generations. As these adult learners grew more empowered, they started contributing to the village in new ways. Farmers adopted modern techniques they had read about in handbooks. Mothers managed household budgets more effectively. Even community meetings took a new shape, more organized, more inclusive, and better informed. The school, once seen as a place just for children, became the intellectual and emotional center of the village, a shared space where knowledge was not just taught but celebrated. It was clear now, education was not just for the young, it was for everyone ready to build a better future. One of the most remarkable changes brought by the school was the empowerment of girls in the village. In many underserved communities, girls are often left behind, trapped by tradition, household duties, or early marriage. But with the new school standing tall and welcoming, everything began to shift. Families started sending their daughters to class alongside their sons, seeing for the first time the value of educating girls. Inside the classrooms, these young girls began to discover their voices. They asked questions, shared ideas, and dreamed out loud, dreams that reached far beyond the walls of their homes. This new access to education started to challenge deep-rooted cultural norms. As girls succeeded in school, they became role models, not just for other children, but for their entire families. Fathers who once doubted the need for girls' education began to boast about their daughters' achievements. Mothers, inspired by their daughters' progress, became strong advocates for equality. Over time, the school became a place where gender didn't limit potential. It nurtured a new generation of confident, educated young women who were ready to shape not just their own futures, but the future of the entire village. The establishment of the school didn't just transform young minds, it began a ripple effect that united the entire village in ways never seen before. What was once a scattered, quiet community slowly became a vibrant, cooperative force. The school became the central meeting place where villagers gathered not only for education but also for community discussions, celebrations, and problem-solving. Parents who had never spoken publicly began engaging in meetings, sharing concerns, and suggesting ideas. The school symbolized a new kind of unity, one built on shared goals, respect, and a collective vision for progress. This newfound sense of togetherness spilled into other aspects of village life. Neighbors began helping one another more often, whether it was in farming, building, or childcare. The school's environment nurtured empathy and cooperation among children, which they carried back into their homes. Adults noticed the change in their children's attitudes and began mirroring that same sense of responsibility and teamwork. The school had unknowingly become a powerful social glue, bringing together generations, bridging differences, and inspiring everyone to see their role in shaping a better future for the village. The introduction of education into the village brought about one of the most powerful and lasting transformations: the empowerment of girls. In the past, daughters were often kept at home, expected to help with household chores, or married off at a young age. Their potential remained untapped, not because they lacked talent or intelligence, but because society had never given them a chance to dream. With the opening of the school, this began to change. Girls walked to class alongside boys, their books in hand and heads held high. For the first time, they were seen as students, as future professionals, as individuals with ambitions that reached beyond the boundaries of their homes. As their confidence grew, so did the community's perception of what girls could achieve. Families that were once hesitant started to believe in their daughters' futures. These young girls began to excel in class, often leading discussions, answering questions boldly, and inspiring even their teachers. The ripple effect extended to their mothers, many of whom had never gone to school themselves but now encouraged their daughters with pride and determination. The school became not just a place of learning, but a place of awakening, a place where girls found their voices, claimed their rights to education, and began shaping a new narrative of equality and possibility in the heart of the village. The impact of the school reached far beyond academics. It became the heartbeat of the entire village's development. Outside of regular school hours, the classrooms transformed into vibrant community spaces. Adults who had never learned to read or write sat eagerly beside one another in evening literacy classes, determined to rewrite the script of their lives. Workshops on farming techniques, sanitation, and basic healthcare began to flourish within the school walls, offering villagers practical knowledge to improve their livelihoods. What was once a quiet, struggling village now pulsed with learning, growth, and collaboration, thanks to a single institution that invited everyone to grow together. This shared learning space fostered unity and pride. Villagers who once felt isolated or left behind were now actively participating in their own development. Men and women, young and old, came together with a sense of shared purpose. The school was no longer just a center for children. It became the nucleus of change for the entire community. Whether someone was planting a better crop, keeping their family healthier, or gaining the confidence to start a small business, the ripple effect of the school's presence was undeniable. It had become the foundation for a more resilient, informed, and hopeful village. One of the most powerful outcomes of the school's presence was the transformation it brought to the mindset of the village's youth. For the first time, children began to dream beyond their immediate surroundings. Exposure to new subjects, stories, and ideas opened their eyes to a world of possibilities. They no longer saw their lives as limited to the hardships their parents endured. Instead, they envisioned futures as doctors, teachers, engineers, and leaders. Teachers encouraged critical thinking, creativity, and self-belief, skills that empowered students to see themselves not as victims of circumstance, but as architects of their destiny. This mental shift wasn't just limited to the students. Their dreams and determination began to inspire the entire village. Parents, many of whom had never dared to imagine such futures, began to believe in the potential of their children. Conversations at home shifted from daily survival to long-term aspirations. Community gatherings started focusing on ways to support the children's ambitions, whether through mentorship, resource sharing, or creating supportive environments for studying. This collective hope created a cultural awakening in the village, one that prioritized growth, education, and the belief that the future could be brighter than the past. The ripple effects of the school extended far beyond academics and into the very fabric of the village's identity. What began as a humble initiative to educate children soon became the heart of the community, a place where ideas were born, relationships were strengthened, and collective pride was cultivated. The school grounds became a venue for community events, celebrations, and decision-making forums. It was no longer just a place for learning, but a symbol of unity, progress, and shared purpose. People who once felt isolated by poverty and struggle now found themselves part of something larger, something meaningful that they had helped build together. Perhaps the most enduring legacy of the school is the generational impact it promises to deliver. The children who once sat under trees with no books or teachers are now equipped with knowledge and purpose. Many have returned to uplift their community, some becoming educators themselves, while others have introduced innovations in farming, health, and technology. This cycle of giving back ensures that the village will not just survive, but thrive. The school stands as a permanent reminder that true transformation begins with a single spark, and when that spark is shared, it has the power to awaken not just 1,000 dreams, but an entire future. In the quiet heart of this once-forgotten village now stands a living symbol of hope, a school born not from wealth, but from belief. What started as a simple building has become a sanctuary of dreams, where laughter echoes through classrooms and the future is written in chalk and courage. It's a place where children now dream freely, where parents stand proud, and where the community walks forward, not in fear, but with purpose. One school changed everything. One act of kindness lit the spark, and one village proved that with opportunity, the impossible becomes inevitable. As we close this chapter, let this story remind us that real change doesn't always come from governments or grand gestures. It often begins with someone who simply decides to care. You don't need to change the whole world to make a difference. You just need to start with one life, one step, one act. Because in the right moment, one school can awaken 1,000 dreams. And in those dreams lie the seeds of a better, brighter world for us all.